Ever since I first saw Your Name, मुझे माकोतो शिनकाई की मूवीज से कुछ अलग ही लगाव है. The fact that his stories usually are really simple stories along with brilliant visuals and the added combination of that goddamn divine musical accompaniment is just so good. And to add to all of that is the fact that हर बार Radwimps कुछ तो शुरू कर देते and then you just start crying. मैंने Garden of Words Your Name के बाद देखा. So for me, Garden of Words was not my introduction into Makoto Shinkai's beautiful cinematic universe. And the reality of it is, Garden of Words is a really good movie. Because एक तो पहली बात, it's a short film. Added to that, there's no amount of extra fluff. It is beautiful because of the simple storytelling, and more importantly, there is no fantasy element. Though it feels like a real story that is being told in an animated fashion. Lekin it still did not hit the same emotional nerves that Your Name hit, and the reason for that is just simply because it was my introduction to Makoto Shinkai. By Garden of Words, I was used to this kind of storytelling and this kind of visual and musical storytelling. But Your Name was the first time I saw something like this. फिर मैंने Tenki no Ko देखा. And while I personally feel like Tenki no Ko had an okay story, it didn't really explain a lot of why the fantasy stuff was happening. It just kept happening, stuff kept being introduced, some stuff just constantly disappeared. It was really confusing, but it still had that distinct Makoto Shinkai flavor to it that keeps me always borderline ready to cry. When I remember these movies, for some reason, I always remember them in a shade of a color. So, Garden of Words for me is a light pastel green color. Your Name is a translucent white to almost pearl white color. And Tenki no Ko is a pastel blue color. So, when Suzume was announced, my instinct was to genuinely enjoy this movie because one, ये theater में आ रही थी, and I'd be getting to watch a Makoto Shinkai movie in theaters for the first time in my life. And that's not even considering it was my first anime watching in theaters for the first time in my life. And second and most importantly, because I wanted to know what kind of impact this movie would have that would lead me to associate a particular color combination for that movie. For some reason, I had assumed that maybe it would be a pastel purple violet kind of color. But my experience watching the movie was not really that great, unfortunately. So, I am a Makoto Shinkai fan, and this is my review of. Now, the reason why I say I was disappointed is not because it's a god awful movie or anything like that. Everything that Makoto does well usually is done well in this movie. The visuals are good, the music is great, the story, as usual, is simplistic. But the problem this time around is that I feel like maybe I don't know whether it was the source material that is flawed because I haven't read the manga. Yes, there's a manga. Or maybe it's that Shinkai took it too far. I don't know exactly why what happened. But for some reason, everything that's happening in the movie, and I'm gonna try to give a spoiler-free review. So everything that's happening in the movie, for some reason, it doesn't really explain a lot of it. Now, sometimes I understand that you should not explain something, you should let the audience fill in the gaps. But what happens is when you rely too much on the intelligence of the audience and do not give them the most basic of information, then it just stops being useful and the audience just stops trying to understand the movie at all. If it were like Christopher Nolan's Tenet, for example, the idea of inversing time is a very cool one. But as we've all understood after having watched the movie, I watched it in theaters during the pandemic. And for some reason, even after having watched that movie so many times, I still feel like maybe, just maybe, there was a way to deliver this story a bit better. give a bit more time for the audience to digest what is going on. And sure, multiple viewings, allowing the audience to discover things on multiple repeat viewings and all is great. But the first time around, there should be something that the audience can pick from it. Suzume unfortunately gave me none of that. Tenet at least had the inversing time thing. For me, again, very subjective, and as you'll find out from the second episode of Katu Satya, reviews and ratings are very, very subjective. So, this is entirely my opinion. Don't base your viewing experience based on that. But what I felt was whatever happens in the fantasy world beyond the doors in that particular trailer shot, whatever happens there, whatever exists over there, for some reason, I don't know why, they opted out of actually explaining what it was. And the biggest problem that arose with this is मैं मेरे दोस्तों के साथ मूवी देखने गया था and all of us are Makoto Shinkai fans. Some of them are even much bigger fans than I am and would go to any extent to justify any sort of Makoto Shinkai product. And somehow they were stumped. The entire theater, which was around 50 to 60 people, all of them were absolutely confused as to what they had just witnessed. And it's not a positive thing, oh my god, ye kya dekha maine? No, it's oh my god, ye kya dekha maine? The jokes in this movie are absolutely phenomenal. Humor is beautifully told without relying on it too much. So, if you are going to watch the movie just for the sake of entertaining yourself and enjoying the Makoto Shinkai experience, then sure, you won't get the entirety of the Shinkai experience, but you will enjoy the overall entertainment value of it. Because let's be honest, anybody else who has watched the movie and is now watching this review will agree with me. The double meaning jokes, the double entendre, that means the same thing, so I'm just repeating myself. And ये सब जो चीजें हैं ना, like the jokes really land well, the characters are really really funny, but that's where I felt like a lot of the characters ended. Suzume, for example, the title character, has a really interesting background, a really interesting history, and somehow they were unable to bring that history into full force. Suzume's aunt, who is also sticking with Suzume for the entirety of the trip, for some reason is not angry at Suzume because she's going on a pan Japan tour with a goddamn three-legged chair. And did I forget to mention that the three-legged chair was a guy before, and the entire time that he was a chair, he said absolutely nothing. Yet, and this I kid you not is not a spoiler, she falls in love with the chair. Now, I did talk to another person who viewed this movie in a more positive light, and I talked to them and they mentioned that the chair is actually a sort of liberatory feeling, a liberatory symbol for Suzume, and that it carries a certain weight. So when she is following that chair, and even though the chair is possessed by the soul of this random guy, she is not actually in love with the guy entirely, and that is a complicated relationship. But the point still stands. This girl with a complicated and traumatic past should not have done this, and yet she is doing this. Why didn't we spend a bit more time on her pondering over this? I'm not asking for an entire 15-minute monologue of her looking into the mirror and then talking to herself. Hell no, there's a world disaster going on, it's a catastrophe. She needs to save people. But the problem here is that she doesn't even stop to think about, why am I doing this? Another unfortunate incidence over here is the fact that for some reason a lot of the characters' motivations are not explained properly. And to add insult to injury, and I know I'm not making sense to a lot of you guys because I'm trying so hard not to give you any spoilers. So I'm being really restrictive when I'm trying to tell you what I'm trying to say. But there are so many aspects of the movie that I felt would deliver. In fact, the climax of the movie, the emotional scenes that this movie is supposedly delivering that would allow you to experience the same Your Name moment or something of that sort, did nothing for me. And maybe it's just the fact that I've become desensitized to this kind of storytelling. Maybe it's that I am no longer in the same brain space where I want to watch this kind of movie at the moment. Maybe I'm just into slice of life at the time. I don't know what it was, but for me personally and for everyone I was with, in fact, I'm not going to say everyone, but definitely 70% of the theater that I was in would agree when I say that this movie did not deliver on the expectation that we all went to watch it with. And the reality of the situation, unfortunately, is that I would have watched the Kaguya Sama movie or maybe the first episode of Oshinoko much more happily because I felt an emotional connect with those characters. Sure, I've been watching Kaguya-sama for a while, so I know those characters. Sure, I've read the manga for Oshinoko, so I am really happy to see that particular anime being adapted so well. But the frank reality is, even if I had not read Oshinoko's manga, I would still have enjoyed it because it is just objectively really, really good. And Suzume, for some reason, is not, and I hate saying this, but it is not as good as I wanted it to be. And I know this feels like I'm over exaggerating or maybe just unnecessarily blowing things out of proportion. But trust me when I say this, I wanted to love the movie. Maybe it's just that I blew out my expectations of the movie. I don't know exactly what happened, but whatever happened did not go well. And the whole idea that this movie is supposed to be giving you, I felt Tenki Noko did a better job at telling a story. I don't know, man. I'm gonna read the manga to see if the manga portrayed it better. Maybe I can read the manga and imagine the visuals that could have been. Because another thing that I noticed is that the visuals, while great, aren't really that distinctive. So, at the start when I said that I was wondering what color my mind would associate with this particular movie, the reason why I feel my mind has associated a color with this particular movie or with the other three movies is probably because that is the color palette, that is the. Another very important thing that I, for some reason, feel like was not done justice is the visual palette. So the animation is not spectacular because what I've noticed is with the other three movies, Garden of the Worlds, pastel green color, I understand why. With Tenki Noko, pastel blue, I understand why. And when I imagine those colors, I immediately associate that color with the rest of the movie because the animation felt distinctive, it felt unique. For some reason, even though this movie has great animation, it feels like it isn't as unique, as distinctive. And I don't know why this is. Maybe it's just the fact that I was disappointed already by the story and stuff like that, or the lack of any Radwimp songs. What is wrong with you guys? One song you prepared for this movie, one song, and that's not even in the movie. What is Shinkai? What are you doing, man? You tease us through the entire movie for that song and you play it at the goddamn end credits. I know I'm being insanely negative about this movie and I understand if you don't agree with me. In fact, I recommend you go watch this movie. One, because the anime community in India is just recently starting to get bigger. So if you watch this movie in the theaters, that will only allow the community to thrive more and the theaters to start taking anime seriously as well as all of the entertainment industry. But the second and most important thing is because I want you to go watch it and I want you to feel like you have a personal opinion on it. Because my personal opinion I've already laid bare in this video. But what I feel is, ये जो particular movie है, I went to watch it with my friends and somehow the enjoyment I got out of watching the movie is nothing compared to the enjoyment I got out of spending 3,000 rupees on popcorns and coke and sandwiches at the theater I was at. Ye comes. I kid you not, I was more happy watching Brahmastra.
God, bro. Oh, hell no.
I am so sorry for comparing Suzume to Brahmastra because there are just some things that Suzume does so much better than Brahmastra, but I feel like I have to mention it because Suzume is like Isha. She sees this random guy quote unquote Sasta Ereniega, and then she follows him across Japan just the same way that Isha did with Shiva. Shiva has a superpower. Sota, the guy who turns into the chair, also has a superpower. Isha has no superpower. Suzume also has no superpower. There's a world-ending catastrophe, and then Suzume follows him across Japan. Same with Isha, she follows him across India. And for some reason, the end climax is about this really weird big cloud that is coming out from the sky into the earth and that is somehow going to destroy the world. This feels like an anime adaptation of Brahmastra, and I hate saying this because I know it is ridiculous to compare it, and I am being a bit ironic and I'm not being very serious when I'm saying this and making this comparison, but you know, I like Brahmastra. And as much as I expected a lot from this movie, Suzume didn't really cut it for me, and that, in my opinion, is the biggest crime for me. It's not a crime made by Makoto Shinkai. It's a crime that the movie did against me, and it's entirely something that I am perceiving, and I do not want any of you to think that y'all are idiots because you like the movie or anything. It's a great movie. Go watch it, enjoy it in theaters, and please let me know what you felt about it.